The grand, silent halls of the Vatican were filled with an unexpected energy. The sun streamed in from the high windows, casting soft beams across the polished floors. Elon Musk, dressed in his usual dark, minimalistic attire, stepped into the room, where the leader of the Catholic Church awaited him. This was no ordinary meeting. It wasn't the typical press conference, nor was it a business deal or a tech summit. This was a conversation only that could potentially alter the way two of the world's most influential figures saw the world. Pope Francis, humble yet charismatic, stood at the front of the room. His robes, simple but elegant, symbolized the deep spirituality that guided his life. He wasn't there to challenge Elon in a traditional sense. Instead, he welcomed him with a warm, knowing smile. His eyes, filled with both wisdom and curiosity, saw something in Elon that many others might miss. Perhaps it was the weight of responsibility that Elon carried with his venture SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and more. Or maybe it was the fact that Elon, much like the Pope, was attempting to change the world in profound ways, albeit through different means. As Elon walked toward him, there was an unspoken tension, the kind of tension that comes when two minds are deeply grounded in the world of technology and innovation. The other in faith and spirituality are about to collide. Elon extended his hand, and the Pope took it gently, offering a firm handshake that held the unspoken promise of respect and openness. "Welcome, Elon," Pope Francis said softly. "I have heard much about your work. You are trying to take humanity to the stars. But tell me, do you also think about where we come from and where we are going?" Elon, taken slightly aback by the question, paused for a moment. This wasn't a usual business exchange. It was something deeper. His typical focus was on creating solutions to push humanity forward and building technology that could outlast him, change the world, and perhaps, ultimately, ensure the survival of mankind. But what did it mean to be going anywhere? Was there more to life than just the journey to Mars? "I believe our future is in the stars," Elon replied, his voice steady yet thoughtful. "We need to ensure the survival of humanity beyond Earth. If we only have one home, we're vulnerable. But if we can make life multiplanetary, we increase our chances of survival." Pope Francis nodded, absorbing Elon's words. He was no stranger to the pursuit of progress and understanding, but his perspective on humanity's future wasn't quite the same. For him, the future wasn't just about where humanity could go, but how humanity could evolve on the inside spiritually and morally. There was a deeper question that lingered in the air. "And yet," the Pope said, his tone gentle but firm, "what is the purpose of this journey? Elon, is it only to reach the stars, or is it also to understand the light within ourselves? Technology can take us to new frontiers, yes, but faith, belief in something greater than ourselves can take us to places no technology can." Elon listened, intrigued by the Pope's question. He never really thought of it that way before. To him, the journey to Mars and beyond was not just about survival. It was about pushing the limits of human potential. But here, in this sacred space, surrounded by centuries of history, the words carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about going somewhere. It was about why and how one should go. The Pope's eyes shone with a quiet wisdom, as if he was guiding Elon through a labyrinth of deeper questions. It wasn't merely about technology. It wasn't about engineering the perfect solution. It was about asking, what is the soul of humanity? What is our true mission on Earth? For a moment, the two men simply stood there, looking at each other. They were from entirely different worlds and built on the foundation of science and progress, the other on faith and tradition, but there was something universal in the space between them. Both were searching for answers, in their own ways. The silence between them was filled with a sense of anticipation, a recognition that this conversation could lead to something bigger than either of them could predict. The grand challenge before them was to find a way for technology to serve humanity, to be guided by the values that could uplift and sustain us. But first, the question that Elon had been avoiding began to surface in his mind. What did faith truly mean in a world so dominated by technology? The conversation was just beginning. The room grew quiet, the air thick with the weight of unasked questions. Elon Musk stood before Pope Francis, still processing the unexpected depth of the Pope's words. Technology, the driving force behind everything he did, had always been clear-cut. It was about progress, solutions, and moving humanity forward. But faith, in the traditional sense, was something Elon had rarely allowed himself to explore. It felt abstract, almost intangible, in a world where logic and reason reigned supreme. Pope Francis, sensing the complexity of the moment, offered a gentle smile. "I understand that you are a man of science," he began, his voice steady. You build rockets, launch satellites, create vehicles that drive themselves. These are incredible achievements, Elon, but I wonder, do you ever ask yourself why you do all of this? What drives you beyond the ambition of advancing technology? Elon took a deep breath, leaning slightly forward in his chair, his mind racing. The Pope wasn't asking about the mechanics of his work or the technical breakthroughs he'd made. He wasn't interested in hearing about SpaceX's next mission or Tesla's latest innovation. He was asking something far more personal, far more profound. I do it because I believe we need to ensure the future of humanity. Elon replied slowly. I've seen what happens when we don't push forward, when we stagnate. We become vulnerable. We must keep innovating if we are to avoid extinction. Pope Francis nodded, his gaze unwavering, as though searching for something deeper within Elon. Yes, the future of humanity is important. But what about the soul of humanity, Elon? What about the moral compass that guides us through these innovations? Where does your faith feed into that? Do you ever wonder if there is something greater, a force beyond our understanding, that calls us to act in ways that go beyond mere survival? Elon's brow furrowed. The question hit him harder than he expected. For most of his life, faith had been something other people adhered to, something that didn't feed into his view of the world. He had always been the scientist, the engineer, the one who looked for answers in data and equations. His faith was rooted in progress, not in the unseen forces that others believed guided their actions. I've never really thought about it that way, Elon admitted, his voice low. My belief has always been in the power of human ingenuity. It's about using our intelligence to solve problems, to overcome challenges. Faith, to me, has always seemed like something people rely on when they can't explain things through logic. Pope Francis smiled again, not with judgment, but with understanding. Faith, my son, is not about the absence of logic or reason. It's about the belief that there is more to life than what we can see, more to existence than what we can measure. Faith offers a sense of purpose, a guide to how we should treat each other and the world around us. It teaches us humility, to know that we are not the ultimate creators. There is something far greater at play. Elon listened, the weight of the words sinking in. He had always thought of faith as a crutch for those who couldn't handle the harsh realities of life. But the Pope's perspective was different. It was about a sense of interconnectedness, of purpose. But still, he was reluctant to fully embrace the idea. How could faith, something so intangible, feed into a world dominated by technology and logic? Do you think that faith can coexist with technology? Elon asked, his curiosity piqued despite his reservations. Can we trust our advancements, our inventions, and still hold on to faith without compromising one for the other? The Pope's eyes softened, and his voice grew even more gentle. Technology has the potential to do great good, Elon. It can connect us, heal us, and even help us protect our planet. But if we forget the values that guide us, values rooted in love, compassion, and respect for all life, then we risk creating a world that is technologically advanced but morally bankrupt. Faith does not deny the importance of science or technology. Instead, it reminds us that we must use these tools responsibly and with empathy, always striving to uplift one another. Elon sat back in his chair, his mind buzzing with the implications of what the Pope was saying. It wasn't that he didn't understand the value of empathy and responsibility, but he had always believed that technological advancements could bring about these changes without the need for faith. Could faith, as the Pope described, truly provide a guiding light for a world increasingly dependent on machines and algorithms? How do you reconcile your faith with the suffering you see in the world? Elon asked, his voice growing quieter. How do you maintain hope when there's so much injustice, poverty, and pain? The Pope's expression softened further, and he leaned forward slightly, as if inviting Elon into a space of shared vulnerability. Faith doesn't offer all the answers, Elon, but it does give us a framework to navigate the struggles we face. It reminds us that we are all connected, and that the work we do is not for ourselves, but for the betterment of others. It helps us to see that even in the darkest times, there is light. There is always the possibility for change, for redemption. Elon was silent for a moment, reflecting on the Pope's words. The idea that faith could offer comfort and purpose in the face of adversity was something he had never fully grasped. Yet, as he sat in this room, in the presence of a man who had dedicated his life to serving others, something began to shift within him. Perhaps there was something to this faith, after all, something that transcended the cold, rational world he had constructed for himself. I can't say that I understand it fully, Elon said finally, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. but I think I'm beginning to see that there's more to life than just progress. Maybe I've been looking at it all wrong." Pope Francis smiled warmly. "You are not alone in that, Ellen. The journey toward understanding is long, but it is one worth taking. And as you continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, may you always remember that true progress comes not only from the mind, but from the heart as well." As the conversation continued, Alan began to feel a subtle shift in his perspective. Faith, which had once seemed like an unnecessary abstraction, now felt like a guiding force that could shape his understanding of his own work and the world at large. He wasn't either divided by or questioned faith or technology, but rather how both could coexist and support one another. The seeds of a deeper conversation were planted, and Elon Musk was beginning to realize that the answers he sought might not come from technology alone, but from something far more profound. Elon Musk left the Vatican after his meeting with Pope Francis, his mind awash with new questions and unfamiliar thoughts. The words of the Pope had lingered with him, reverberating in the back of his mind like an echo he couldn't quite shake. As a man of science, Elon was used to clear answers, to the simplicity of numbers and facts. But the Pope's message about faith, about love, and about a greater connection between humanity had given him a sense of uncertainty, one he wasn't accustomed to. He returned to his office at SpaceX, hoping that the familiar hum of his work would ground him. But instead, the questions only grew louder. His team of engineers was busy with preparations for an upcoming launch, but Alan found it hard to focus. His mind wandered to the conversation he had just had. He was no longer certain that technology alone could provide the answers he had spent his life seeking. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. It was Gwen Shotwell, the president and O of SpaceX, holding a tablet in her hand. "Alan, we've got updates on the upcoming Mars mission," she said, walking in without waiting for a response. But her expression quickly softened when she noticed his distant look. "Everything all right?" Alan didn't answer immediately. He stood up, walking over to the window, staring out at the distant horizon. His thoughts were still swirling, but this time, there was an odd sense of clarity that he couldn't ignore. "Gwen, do you believe in faith?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't the kind of topic that came up in their usual conversations. Gwen was a brilliant engineer, driven by the same goal of reaching Mars and making humanity a multiplanetary species. Faith, in her world, was not something often discussed, but she had known Ellen for years, and she could tell when something was weighing on him. "That's an interesting question," Gwen said slowly, considering her answer. "I don't know that I've ever really thought about it. I believe in people, what we can accomplish together, what we can create with our technology, but faith in the traditional sense, I guess I haven't given it much thought." Ellen nodded. The weight of his own uncertainty mirrored in Gwen's response. "I met with Pope Francis yesterday," he said, turning to face her. "He asked me about faith, about what drives me beyond the pursuit of technology, and I don't know how to answer him. I've always believed that technology is the key to our future, but now, I'm not so sure." Gwen placed the tablet on his desk and walked over to stand next to him, glancing out at the same horizon. "I don't know what the Pope said, but I do know that you've dedicated your life to a bigger vision, to ensuring the survival of humanity, to pushing us beyond the boundaries we've known. That's something to believe in." Ellen turned to her, his eyes searching for some form of clarity. "But what if there's more to it than just survival? What if we're missing something deeper? I spent so much of my life focused on the next mission, the next launch, the next innovation. But in all of that, where does the soul of humanity feed? Where does love, or connection, or faith come into play?" Gwen was silent for a moment, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of the world outside the window. "I don't know, Ellen, but I think sometimes we get so caught up in the practicalities of our work that we forget the reason we're doing it in the first place. You've always said that you want to save humanity. Maybe faith, whether it's faith in each other, in a greater good, or even in a higher purpose, helps us remember that we're not just here to exist. We're here to make something better. Maybe that's enough." Ellen looked at her, his mind racing with the possibility of what she said. He had always focused on the practical, the tangible, the engineering, the science, the steps that could bring humanity closer to a better future. But now, as Gwen spoke, he began to wonder if perhaps the question wasn't just about survival. Maybe it was about creating a world worth surviving for. "I've always believed that technology is the answer," Ellen said slowly, "but now I'm starting to think that maybe it's not just about solving problems, it's about creating a world that's worth solving for. That's where the faith part comes in, isn't it?" Gwen nodded, offering a small smile. I think you're starting to see it. Elon, you've always said that we have to think beyond the next step, beyond the next launch. Maybe it's time to think about what kind of world we're actually building. A world with more than just technology, but with meaning, connection, and compassion. Elon stood in silence, the weight of the conversation settling on him. It wasn't that he had suddenly found all the answers, but for the first time, he was beginning to see the path that connected his work with something deeper. Faith, he realized, wasn't just about religion or abstract beliefs. It was about the values that guided humanity toward a better future. It was about creating a purpose that transcended technology and connected people on a deeper level. I think I've got a lot more thinking to do, Elon said finally, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm on the right track. Quinn gave him an encouraging nod. Take your time, Elon. We're all in this together, and whatever you decide, we'll follow you wherever you go. As Quinn left the room, Elon returned to his desk, his thoughts still in motion but with a new sense of clarity. The meeting with the Pope had opened up a new chapter in his journey, a chapter that would not only define his work but his legacy. The question of faith, once foreign and unimportant to him, was now intertwined with the very future he was striving to build. And for the first time, Elon Musk was beginning to understand that true progress wasn't just about technology. It was about the heart, about the soul of humanity, and the connection that could bind them all together in the pursuit of a better tomorrow. The weeks following Elon's meeting with Pope Francis were filled with a quiet, unspoken transformation. Though his work continued at SpaceX, and the mission to Mars remained a top priority, Elon's thoughts often drifted back to the idea of faith and its place within the context of humanity's future. He spent long hours reflecting, sometimes alone, sometimes with his closest team members, trying to reconcile the tangible advancements he was striving for with the more abstract concepts of meaning and connection. Quinn had noticed a shift in his demeanor, subtle but profound. There was a quiet intensity in the way he spoke now, a focus not just on technology but on the bigger picture. Elon still had the same ambition, the same drive to push the boundaries of what was possible, but now there was an underlying sense of purpose, something more than just scientific achievement. One morning, as the team gathered for their weekly briefing, Elon surprised everyone by bringing up a topic that seemed out of place for the room. As the engineers discussed rocket specifications and mission timelines, Elon interjected, his voice steady but full of a new resolve. Before we get into the details, he said, looking around the table, I want to talk about something different today, something that's been on my mind a lot lately. The team fell silent, curious but unsure of what to expect. Elon wasn't known for straying from technical matters, and his sudden pivot to a philosophical topic was unexpected. Quinn raised an eyebrow, but gave him a nod of encouragement. I've been thinking about the future we're building, Elon continued, his eyes scanning the room. We're not just working on rockets, or on getting to Mars. We're shaping the future of humanity, and I've realized that we need to think about more than just survival or innovation. We need to think about the kind of world we're creating once we get there, a world that people will actually want to live in. There was a murmur among the engineers, some exchanging puzzled glances. They were used to Elon's passion and vision, but this was a different side of him, one they hadn't seen before. What do you mean by that? One of the engineers asked, unsure how to interpret Elon's words. Elon paused, then spoke with a new kind of clarity, as if the words had been waiting to be said for some time. We've always focused on the technical challenge, just getting to Mars, building the infrastructure, creating the technology. But there's a bigger question here. What are we really doing this for? What's the end goal? Technology alone isn't enough. We need something more. We need a purpose that connects people, a vision that inspires humanity. Quinn leaned forward, intrigued by Elon's shift in focus. Are you saying we need to rethink our mission, the mission to Mars? Elon shook his head slowly. No, the mission to Mars is still critical, but we need to start thinking about the legacy we'll leave behind. We can't just be pioneers in space. We need to be pioneers in how we shape the future. What will humanity's values be on Mars? Will we create a society driven by greed and exploitation, or one built on cooperation, compassion, and connection? We need to ask ourselves these questions now, before we even get there. There was a long pause as the room digested Elon's words. It was clear that this wasn't just another meeting, it was a turning point. The engineers had always been dedicated to the mission, but now they were being asked to think about something deeper, something that transcended the technical details. One of the engineers, a young woman named Maria, spoke up. Alan, I think I understand what you're getting at. You're asking us to think about the future being the technology we create. You want us to think about the kind of society we'll build on Mars, and how we can make it better than the one we have here. Ellen nodded. Exactly. It's not enough to just create a new world. We have to ensure that the people who live there are children. Our grandchildren will inherit a society that values what really matters. That means building a culture of empathy, understanding, and respect. We can't let technology be the only thing we value. We have to make sure we build a community that cares for each other. There was a sense of awe in the room. The engineers, who had always seen themselves as part of a cutting-edge team, now found themselves on the brink of something bigger than they had ever imagined. They weren't just solving technical problems anymore. They were being called to help shape the moral compass of an entirely new society. Maria's voice was quiet, but filled with conviction. I think we can do that, Ellen. I think we can build something better, but it's going to take all of you, every one of you, to make sure that our values are a part of the foundation, not just an afterthought. Ellen's gaze softened, and he looked around the room at his team. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. There was something incredibly powerful in the collective commitment to this idea, something that resonated beyond the walls of SpaceX with a mission to Mars. You're right, Maria, Elon said, his voice steady. We can do this, but we have to start now. Every decision we make, every technology we develop, needs to be rooted in the values we want to see in the world, and that's going to require a shift in how we think about progress. The meeting ended with a new sense of purpose. As the team returned to their work, there was a shared understanding that the journey they were on was about more than just reaching Mars. It was about creating a future that aligned with the values of compassion, cooperation, and connection. Elon Musk knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, technical, ethical, and philosophical, but for the first time, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that the mission he had dedicated his life to was now not just about technology, but about the future of humanity itself. In the months that followed Elon's revelations during the meeting at SpaceX, a palpable shift began to take hold not just within the company, but also in his own personal outlook. He had always been known for his laser focus on innovation and achieving the seemingly impossible. However, his new commitment to shaping a compassionate and values-driven future on Mars had begun to influence everything from daily decisions to long-term strategic plans. The SpaceX team, too, started thinking differently. Engineers, scientists, and support staff all began looking at their work with a renewed sense of purpose. Each mission, each technological breakthrough, was now framed within a broader context. They were no longer just engineering the future of space travel. They were laying the foundations for a society that would one day live on a new world. And that society, Elon made clear, needed to be one that embodied the best qualities of humanity. Gwen Shotwell, who had been by Elon's side since the early days of SpaceX, was particularly struck by this change in direction. As the president and CEO of the company, she had always been a strong advocate for the practical side of SpaceX goals. But lately, she had come to see that there was something essential about the vision Elon was now pursuing. There was a human element at its core that resonated with her own values, something that transcended the technical feats they were accustomed to. One evening, as the two of them Saturday in a private meeting, Elon once again broached the topic of the future. You know, Gwen, I've been thinking about this a lot, Elon said, leaning back in his chair. We're so focused on getting to Mars, but we need to start thinking more about what happens after we get there. What happens when we actually have people living on the planet? Gwen nodded thoughtfully. We've been focused on technology, rockets, habitats, life support systems, but I get what you're saying. The human element is just as important. Exactly, Elon replied. When we're building the infrastructure, we need to think about the social and ethical implications. What kind of world do we want to create for the first Martian settlers? What kind of values will guide them? This can't just be about survival. It has to be about creating a community that's built on the right principles. Gwen was quiet for a moment, reflecting on the implications of Elon's words. She had always been pragmatic, but the idea of shaping an entire society from the ground up was something that held immense potential. This was no longer just a mission, it was an opportunity to correct the mistakes of Earth and create a model for the future. You're right, she finally said. This isn't just about sending people to Mars. It's about making sure that the society we build, there is one that reflects the values we want to see in the world. But how do we do that? How do we ensure that the right values are woven into everything we do? Elon's gaze was steady, as though he had already been thinking about this for some time. It starts with the way we design the systems, the way we build the infrastructure, but it also starts with the way we communicate this vision to everyone involved, from the engineers to the astronauts to the future settlers. Everyone needs to be on the same page, not just about how we're going to get to Mars, but about the kind of society we want to create once we're there. The conversation continued late into the evening, delving deep into the philosophical and ethical questions that lay ahead. What would the role of government be on Mars? How would they balance technological progress with ethical considerations? What were the rights of the people who would live there? And perhaps most importantly, how could they foster a sense of unity and compassion among the settlers, despite the vastness and isolation of the red planet? In the following months, Elon and his team began taking tangible steps toward integrating these ideas into the SpaceX mission. They held internal discussions on ethics and governance, inviting philosophers, sociologists, and ethicists to weigh in on the potential pitfalls of colonization. They brainstormed ideas for creating a society that was not just technologically advanced, but also just and equitable. Elon made it clear that this wasn't going to be easy. Mars, after all, was a harsh and unforgiving environment. The challenges of establishing a permanent settlement were monumental, but that didn't mean they could ignore the broader picture. Every decision they made, from the selection of crew members to the design of habitats, needed to align with the vision of building a society that would uplift humanity, rather than merely perpetuate its flaws. Meanwhile, Elon continued his conversations with faith leaders and philosophers, seeking to expand his understanding of the deeper questions that his mission raised. He reached out to leaders from a wide range of faiths: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and even indigenous belief systems. The idea was not to impose one particular worldview, but to explore how different perspectives could contribute to the moral framework of the Martian society they were preparing to build. In one particularly poignant conversation with a prominent Buddhist monk, Elon discussed the concept of interconnectedness, a core tenet of Buddhist philosophy. The monk spoke about the idea that all beings are interdependent, and that true happiness comes from understanding and compassion for others. Elon had been struck by how this idea aligned with his own evolving views on the future of humanity. It wasn't enough to just survive on Mars. They needed to thrive, and that meant creating a culture of compassion and mutual support. I think the concept of interconnectedness could be incredibly important for the future society we're trying to build, Elon remarked during their conversation. It's not just about building a colony that's self-sustaining. It's about building a community that's interconnected, where people care for each other, where we recognize that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others. The monk nodded, smiling gently. Yes, this is the way forward. The heart of a community is its compassion, its understanding of the interdependence of all life. As the discussions deepened, Elon became more convinced that these principles needed to be part of the core values of the Mars mission. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges: political, logistical, and technological, but if they could create a society on Mars that was grounded in empathy, cooperation, and interconnectedness, then they would have succeeded in building something truly transformative. As SpaceX plans for Mars began to take shape, the team started to realize the enormity of what they were attempting. This was not just a mission to send people to a new planet, it was a chance to reimagine what it meant to be human. The vision for Mars had evolved beyond the technical hurdles of space travel to a larger question: what kind of society could humanity build if given a fresh start? The shift was gradual but profound. It wasn't just about overcoming the challenges of living on Mars. It was about creating something that transcended Earth's history of conflict, inequality, and environmental degradation. SpaceX had always prided itself on innovation, but now the company was also grappling with a deep moral responsibility. How could they ensure that the settlers of Mars would be equipped not just to survive, but to thrive both as individuals and as a collective? Elon continued to push this new vision during internal meetings, challenging his team to think not just about the logistics of the Mars mission, but about the cultural and philosophical framework that would guide it. How would Martian settlers govern themselves? What would be the moral foundation of this new society? Elon's insistence on asking these big questions was contagious, and the company's engineers, scientists, and leaders began to take a broader view of their work. One day, in a strategic meeting with key executives, Elon spoke about a groundbreaking idea, the potential to create a new kind of democracy on Mars, one that was rooted in the collective well-being of all settlers. On Earth, democracy has always been imperfect. There are power structures, inequality, and corruption that undermine its potential. Elon began, but what if we could design a system where everyone truly has a voice? What if we could create a model where decisions are made based on the needs of the community, rather than the desires of the few? His words resonated deeply with the team. The idea of a truly egalitarian society, one where resources were shared, decisions were made collaboratively, and each person's well-being was prioritized, as inspiring. It was a radical reimagining of governance, one that could potentially serve as a blueprint not only for Mars, but for a better future on Earth as well. Gwen Shotwell, ever the realist, raised a challenge. That sounds ideal, Elon, but how do you actually implement it? How do you ensure that a new society doesn't fall into the same traps as the old one? Elon leaned forward, his face lighting up with excitement. That's the challenge, Gwen, but I think the key is building a system of governance that's transparent, responsive, and rooted in values of empathy and fairness. One that prioritizes the well-being of the community over individual power. We can start with a council of representatives who are accountable to the people they serve, and we can build mechanisms for direct participation so that everyone has a say, whether it's through voting on policies or contributing to decisions about resource distribution. The idea of direct democracy, where every settler could participate in decision-making, would be unprecedented in the history of space exploration, but for Elon, it was the only way forward. Mars would need to be a place where people didn't just survive, but where they could create a flourishing society that was truly democratic and equitable. As the discussion continued, the team began brainstorming practical steps to put this vision into action. How would the settlement be organized? How would resources be allocated in a way that ensured fairness for all? How could they prevent the kind of corruption and exploitation that had plagued human societies throughout history? These questions weren't easy to answer, but the willingness to ask things to challenge the status quo and think beyond the limits of existing systems was something that set the Mars mission apart. It wasn't just about creating technology that could survive on Mars. It was about creating a new kind of civilization, one that was built on the lessons of the past but free from its most destructive patterns. Meanwhile, Elon continued to have conversations with philosophers, ethicists, and spiritual leaders from around the world. He knew that to truly create a society that embodied compassion and empathy, it would take more than just technical knowledge. It would take wisdom from a variety of traditions and perspectives. In one conversation with a renowned moral philosopher, Elon discussed the concept of virtue ethics, which emphasized the development of moral character over the following of rigid rules. The philosopher explained that virtue ethics was based on the idea that individuals should cultivate virtues like compassion, courage, and wisdom, and that these virtues would guide their actions in any situation. I think this is crucial for our Mars mission, Elon said thoughtfully. If we want to build a society that is truly humane, we need to cultivate virtues in everyone who is part of it. We need to prioritize character development just as much as we prioritize technical expertise. The philosopher nodded. Exactly. Virtue ethics is about shaping individuals who will make decisions not out of self-interest, but out of a deep commitment to the well-being of others. As these ideas percolated through the SpaceX leadership, Elon began to see a clearer picture of the future. Mars, he realized, could be a place where humanity could try something different, a society where empathy, virtue, and direct democracy could guide the creation of a new world. But this vision was not without its risks. The challenges of living on Mars were immense. The planet was inhospitable, with extreme temperatures, radiation, and a thin atmosphere. The first settlers would have to endure hardships that no human had ever faced before. The physical and psychological toll would be great, and there was no guarantee that the new society would succeed. Yet Elon felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The Mars mission was not just a scientific or technological endeavor, it was a moral one. The future of humanity was at stake. If they could build a society on Mars that embodied the best qualities of human nature, they could offer the world a new vision for the future. As the team began working on the practicalities of setting up a Mars settlement, Elon kept returning to the idea that this mission was not just about survival. It was about creating something better, something that could inspire humanity to reach for the stars, not just in terms of technological advancement, but in terms of social progress and moral development. In the months to come, SpaceX would continue its work on Mars missions. But now, there was a new urgency behind every project, every conversation. The mission was bigger than any one person, any one company. It was about the future of humanity. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends. To subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.